Hello and welcome back to another Thoughts per episode House of the Dragon edition. Today we are talking about Season 2, Episode 3, The Burning Mill. And to be perfectly honest, I want to throw the notes approach out the window and just talk about the end of this episode for a minute because it's audacious. So the really fun thing about the show is that it isn't an adaptation of a book, it's an adaptation of a fictional history which has been told from historical perspectives. So in the Fire and Blood book written by George R.R. Martin, the book itself is a history that is written in universe, and it looks at different historical sources. Like you've got Mushroom, the dwarf who's always rowdy and always kind of saying that the craziest theories are true, and then you've got I think it's like this Septon, or this man of a faith who's basically you've got biases. It's been a while since I read the book. But the fun thing about this is not only does the show get to choose, what the truth of the matter is and make it more muddied and more complicated than anyone would maybe believe of historical events, but they also get to show us things that no one would have been privy to, like the secret meeting between Rhaenyra and Alicent. That's not going to go down in the history books because it was secret, And it is a bit audacious, and it is a bit of an excuse to have a one last scene, I guess. I don't know if it'll be one last scene. I don't really remember the events of the Fire and Blood book at this point, but I assume one last scene between Rhaenyra and Alicent before it all kicks off. And, last season introduced this idea that they're trying to do this thing where both sides are sympathetic and both sides are feasibly right. And so Rhaenyra thinks she's right because she has been the heir apparent for all these years. And then Alicent thinks she's right because she thinks that Viserys told her that Aegon should rule in the last seconds before he died. And it's a really fun thought experiment to be like, okay, now how would they react if, especially Alicent, how would she react if she knew the truth? That's not what Viserys was saying, and that this entire thing has been built on misunderstanding. Would it be possible to stop what's about to come if she had this knowledge? And of course, tragically, we see in the scene that Alicent, first of all, we've got Rhaenyra having to accept the fact of what Alicent believes, that actually Viserys did decide that Aegon was supposed to rule. And so that's quite, tragic to watch. But then, thankfully, Alicent keeps talking and mentions about the prince that was promised, and Rhaenyra realizes the misunderstanding and then tells Alicent that she's misunderstood and explains why. And so now it's on Alicent's shoulders of Aegon is not the rightful king, but it's too late because it's post-coronation and power resides where men believe it resides. I think that's a quote from Game of Thrones. So Aegon is already king, and also Alicent knows that much of Aegon's court was already planning this coup regardless of what Viserys said. So Rhaenyra is trying to tell Alicent, you've got to stop this, you've got to tell people I am the rightful queen, but Alicent still says it's too late. And yeah, it's this really fascinating idea of what if they actually got to talk, iron out the misunderstandings? Is it still possible to avert the war? I love that they did this. I know it's a little much, right? Smuggling Rhaenyra into King's Landing, it's a little much, but at the same time, it is also back then they didn't have photographs of the king and the queen. Obviously, people don't know what they look like for the most part. It is feasible. It's just the word feasible is probably doing some heavy lifting. But that's just me projecting what other people might be bothered about. I really liked the scene, and I love that they did it. Because a lot of the time, you look back at history and you go, if these two sides just sat down and talked, everything would be avoided. And it's really fun to be like, okay, we're going to get them to sit down and talk, and you're going to see that it's still too late to be avoided because of all the other factors that are in play at this point. And it goes back to the beginning of this episode with the Burning Mill, where they talk about the fact that House Blackwood and House Bracken, I think they were called, they've got this ancient family feud, and it's like, oh, what are they arguing about? And they're like, nobody knows. Not even they know. At this point, they're just exacting revenge on each other for the latest atrocity they've committed against each other, and obviously that's meant to be well, that's what these two parts of a Targaryen house are doing now. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. If we're going to go back through the episode real quick then as well, I noticed that the intro, they have now woven a new scene into the tapestry of young Jaehaerys being beheaded. I just realised as I saw that, I think the weaves of the tapestry are only going to update as Targaryens die, and I assume more Targaryens are going to die. Oh, while I remember it, I know it's a little random in the middle of this video, I just want to address a couple of things about last week's video as well. No one said anything, but firstly, the more I thought about it, the more I thought I was maybe being a bit too lenient on Daemon's character. I'm not going to feel comfortable until I put that out into the wild. And secondly, I think I've realised who, what's his name? Alan? His name's Alan, right? That guy, he didn't appear in this episode, but he appeared in the last two episodes. He was talking to Corlys Velaryon. I bet he's a bastard, because when you think about it, you know, the whole story with Corlys Velaryon is the House of Velaryon is dwindling. There's not many Velaryons left, and there are no heirs kind of in sight, and that is a conversation that kind of takes place in this episode. There's no suitable heirs, you know, no one who understands the Velaryon ways, no one who's a good sailor or even like not a baby. And Corlys is kind of you know, he's kind of like regretting this. But I think Alan is probably a bastard of Corlys's, and so that would make sense, right? Because Alan saved Corlys's life, pulled him out of the water, and Corlys thanks him, but there's this weird tension between them, and Alan doesn't get invited to sail with Corlys despite this. I reckon it's because Alan is Corlys's bastard. If I've got Alan's name wrong, I apologise, but I'm pretty sure that's what he's called. He's got a brother as well, hasn't he? So maybe there's going to be this struggle for power with the Velaryons, or this kind of uncomfortable, like, you know, in Game of Thrones, in the time of Game of Thrones, there's this idea that royalty can make a bastard a full member of the house that he was part of. So maybe that begins here, because I don't know that we've seen anything like that take place in this era of history. At least none that I can think of, no examples. So I'm looking at a scene of Rhaenyra with her council, and in this episode we see the council get more and more frustrated with her inaction, and they also try to kind of like sideline her and tell her she should go somewhere that's safe and let them wage the war themselves, to which Rhaenyra's like, well, that's treason, and it's a good thing you didn't go any further with it, because that's treason. I am your queen. And it's wild that even amongst Rhaenyra's most, you know, fervent supporters, like literally people on her small council, even they are like, oh yeah, you're a woman, so you're not, you know, we'll do the ruling for you kind of a thing. It's ridiculous. But it is also born of this reluctance that Rhaenyra has to kind of like escalate the situation. And it's sad to watch, because Rhaenyra is the only person, it feels like, with a cool head in this entire situation who is trying to stop events from unfolding the way that they are. Like, you could argue Alicent's a little bit like that for the Greens, but she's not really. She's certainly not as reluctant as Rhaenyra is in terms of, you know, or I guess she has less control than Rhaenyra is maybe the problem. We get to see cunning linguist Kristen Cole in his role as the Hand. We get to see, I feel like we get also to see more of him as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and how the Kingsguard feel about their Lord Commander, because he's not liked, you get the impression. Like, immediately, because Alicent sends her brother to go with Kristen Cole to do the thing. He's doing a thing. I definitely caught every troop movement and remember it all in my head perfectly, because I'm a professional. They're scouting, I think, is the idea, right? Anyway, her brother wins over the rest of the Kingsguard knights super duper easily. He's like, he treats you like shit. We should go to an inn. And then again, we see how niceness doesn't always prevail, and Kristen, you know, they almost all die because they didn't follow the asshole's words, basically. There's this brilliant scene of Rhaena, She's called Rhaena, I think. There are so many Targaryen names. Basically, spotting the glint of their armor from her dragon. I love when Kristen Cole's looking up at the clouds and he sees the dragon up high. He's like, we're exposed. That's such a good scene. And then she like chases them down and almost gets them. Such a good scene, dude. Anyway, another aspect of this episode I want to talk about is Daemon and his taking Harrenhal, and how it is entirely bereft of glory or fighting or excitement, and you get the impression that Daemon's gone there to try and like find an outlet for his rage. You know, he solves his emotional problems through violence all of the time, and he doesn't get that outlet here. And the Lord of Harrenhal quite wisely just immediately bows to him. He's like, yeah, of course, Harrenhal's yours. We swear fealty to Rhaenyra, all that stuff. But you can tell it's a very half-hearted kneeling. You get the impression that Lord Strong doesn't necessarily care. He just wants to stay alive. He doesn't care who's on the throne. And that's signalled to us through the fact that he keeps saying things like, my prince, and then having to correct himself. Your grace, sorry. And then he's like, oh yeah, if you win. When you win, sorry. And Daemon's kind of like almost expecting to be assassinated. He won't touch the meal because he thinks it's going to be poisoned. He bars the doors with a sword so no one could get in. And there is this really weird sequence that takes place. I get the impression it's a dream sequence, but at first I was like, is this a dragon dream? And then I was like, wait, is this a weirwood dream? Because the dark-haired girl who's there shows up, so there's two halves to this dream. The first is where Daemon goes to investigate whoever's been pushing against his door, and he finds this room where Rhaenyra, young Rhaenyra, the original actress, returns, which is pretty cool, and she's sewing Jaehaerys' head back on and complaining that Daemon always leaves and then leaves her to clean up his messes. And he has a bit of an emotional response to this as well. You get the impression that maybe he's feeling a little ashamed at this striking imagery he's been presented with. And I was like, is this a dragon dream? And then suddenly we see him at the head of a weirwood tree in a ruined castle. I think it's the Red Keep, but I might be wrong. But that weirwood tree is in the Red Keep's courtyard. We saw it in season 1, and that's curious because it's not there in the time of Game of Thrones. And yeah, this dark-haired woman tells him, like, you will die here. And so is she like, because this is before the time of what's-his-face? Brynden Black Rivers, is that his name? The guy in the tree. He's more around the time of the Dunk and Egg stories, the prequel stories. So is she like him? There's in this show there are a lot of kind of like analogues, like Larys Strong is kind of an analogue of Peter Baelish. He's kind of Peter Baelish and Varys at the same time, actually. I mean, you've got the Master of Coin and you've got the Lord of Winterfell, and they're all these kind of characters which are analogous to the later ones we see in Game of Thrones. And I just wonder if this girl is meant to be analogous to the Three-Eyed Raven. That's the one, the Three-Eyed Raven, the Three-Eyed Crow. I think he's got different names depending on the book or the show. So yeah, that was a very interesting dream sequence. I don't know if it was just added to be cool or if it's going to be important and come up later, but it does add this kind of like Macbeth style prophetic allusion to Daemon. I like the idea that he has now been told where and how he is going to die and how that might play into his character. Because Daemon thinks he's the greatest. I don't think he thinks he's ever going to die. So that's got to be some pretty hard news to take. By the way, it's pretty rare in this show and in Game of Thrones before it that we're ever shown the inside of a character's thoughts, like their dreams and stuff. So that's also something to consider. We have this interesting scene with a commoner who says that he's a distant bastard relative of the crown. He's a Targaryen without the name, and we see he's kind of presented as a king of the common people, right? Like when he enters the tavern, he's talking to everyone, he's greeted warmly, he's got exchanges with people before he finally sits down with the people he's there to see, and he's meeting with someone from Dawn. And he's there to tell him that, Rhaenyra's the true queen, etc., etc., which is pretty awkward because then Aegon shows up. And ultimately this scene does end up being about Aegon and his travels. But it's interesting that it's presented to us firstly through the eyes of someone who may or may not be a secret Targaryen. Probably isn't. You get the impression that there are a lot of people who like to declare themselves as secret bastard Targaryens to gain some kind of status among the common folk. But it's also to show that whether he is or whether he isn't, he's also there to kind of drum up support for Rhaenyra's cause within enemy territory, so to speak. It's a reminder that the common folk are, like, important and multitudinous, and, you know, their opinions and their actions also have a place within this Game of Thrones. Oh my god, I said the name. Anyway, Aegon takes his well, first of all, he's got his mates into the Kingsguard, and they joke about the fact that one of them has never had sex, and that they're gonna get him. Come on, it'll be a laugh. We'll get him down to the pleasure houses, and we'll get him bedded. And Aegon's like, "You took a vow of chastity," and he looks at them really seriously. But then obviously it turns out that they do go and take him down the pub. By the way, before we skid past it, I do like how the only way they managed to talk Aegon down from going to war himself, looking for glory on his dragon and immediately getting killed, is by having Larys be like, "Oh, people are whispering that the realm is really controlled by," scrabbles around for people, "your mother and who else? Your brother," and he just eats it up. He's so naive. So he decides to stay. Anyway, yeah, they find Aemond in the tavern, it's not a tavern, in the brothel, in the arms of the brothel keeper, and Aegon basically bullies him and makes fun of him, and they all stand there and laugh at naked Aemond, who, you know, this is his, in a weird, warped, incestuous kind of a way, this is his safe space, where he can talk to his mother, maternal figure that he is lacking in real life, and express to her all of his vulnerabilities. So the fact that he gets found here literally naked and then bullied is a deep wound in his heart, probably. And of course then he adopts the kind of guise of the badass that he's been trying to foster, and you know, he marches off fully naked. He doesn't care that he's naked, and he's like, "Yeah, you know, she's just another whore, you can have her." And I think it's interesting to explore this dynamic between Aegon and Aemond as brothers, because, well, you'd think they should be brothers, they should be supporting each other. You know, in many ways they're also rivals, so yeah. Oh, Targaryens, they sure are a happy family, aren't they? What else? Oh, Rhaenyra sends Baelor, is it Baelor, away with her kids to be safe across the Narrow Sea, and also says to her that if all comes to ruin here, you carry our last hopes, and that's her children Viserys and Aegon, as well as 4 dragon eggs and some young dragons, which is a pretty significant responsibility. But of course Baelor does not want to have to leave everyone and everything she has ever known. I have to wonder as well if you know, Daemon might have something to say about that should he and Rhaenyra meet again. Anyway, I'm sure I've missed a couple of things, but I wanted to be a little bit more naturalistic than last week. So yeah, these are my thoughts on this episode of House of the Dragon. If I did forget to talk about something you're curious to hear my thoughts on, feel free to leave a comment and I will reply to you. But other than that, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in whatever I make next.